Stephanie White does a interview with a radio down there in Indiana. Pretty good interview.
A fierce behind-the-curtain takeover has been unfolding, and almost nobody recognized it in real time. For months, conversations around the league centered on envy, ongoing feuds, and longtime insiders attempting to minimize the cultural phenomenon that captured the attention of the entire sports landscape. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. The executives, seasoned coaches, and media personalities who spent months dismissing the excitement are now scrambling to position themselves at the front of the line to benefit from the enormous financial boom. At the heart of this whirlwind sits a stunning revelation delivered by none other than Stephen A. Smith. He pulled no punches, validating concerns that dedicated fans have been discussing for quite some time about the glaring contradictions inside the league's leadership circles. His comments shed light on a remarkable situation involving Stephanie White, the Indiana Fever organization, and a power structure that appears increasingly disconnected from the people supporting the game. The race to capitalize on the Caitlin Clark phenomenon has reached a whole new level. Music, and the executive decisions taking place behind closed doors are nothing short of astonishing. To grasp how dramatic this shift has become, we first have to revisit the fallout that recently shook the Fever organization from within. The basketball world was stunned when Christy Sides was unexpectedly pushed aside in a move that many viewed as shockingly harsh. Picture guiding a struggling franchise that had spent years stuck in irrelevance, navigating immense pressure and constant scrutiny, and ultimately bringing that team back to postseason basketball, only to lose your position almost immediately afterward. Despite the challenges early in the year, Sides had begun unlocking ways to maximize one of the most dynamic offensive talents the college game has ever produced. Momentum was building, team chemistry was improving, and supporters were finally witnessing meaningful success after years of frustration. Following the Olympic break, Indiana evolved into one of the most exciting teams in basketball, becoming an offensive powerhouse capable of overwhelming even the league's most experienced opponents. Yet progress and loyalty appeared to hold little value in the eyes of decision-makers. As soon as the Fever's playoff run ended against the Connecticut Sun, leadership seemingly recognized the immense commercial opportunity sitting in front of them and concluded that a hard-working, development-focused coach no longer fit the image they wanted to project. They sought a headline-grabbing figure, someone who could command attention, appear visionary in music, seamlessly benefit from the presence of a generational superstar. The decision to move on from Sides felt less like a basketball choice and more like a strategic business maneuver, a clear indication that the Fever were no longer being viewed simply as a team, but as a rapidly expanding global sports brand. However, what unfolded behind the scenes afterward completely reshaped the narrative, almost at the exact same time that major changes were taking place in Indiana. Another eyebrow-raising development emerged on the other side of the country. Stephanie White, one of the most respected and accomplished coaches in the game, unexpectedly parted ways with the Connecticut Sun, sending shockwaves throughout basketball circles. From a purely competitive standpoint, the move seemed difficult to explain. White had helped build Connecticut into one of the league's premier organizations, creating a team loaded with battle-tested veterans, elite defenders, and players fully committed to her physical, disciplined approach. Year after year, they remained among the top contenders, coming painfully close to capturing a championship through multiple deep postseason runs. So why would a coach willingly leave behind a proven contender featuring stars like Alyssa Thomas and DeWanna Bonner? The explanation appeared both obvious and unsettling. Music, revolving entirely around the extraordinary attention centered on the Midwest. White recognized the same opportunity that countless league insiders had begun chasing. Winning a championship in Connecticut would certainly enhance or resume music, but becoming the head coach of the Indiana Fever offered something far bigger: national visibility, nonstop media attention, and access to the most valuable spotlight in women's basketball. It was a perfectly timed career move, arriving after someone else had already navigated the most difficult phase of the journey. The foundation was already in place. The growing pains had already been absorbed, and now the stage appeared fully prepared for a new face to arrive and receive much of the credit. Many longtime basketball observers viewed the transition skeptically. Music, believing it reflected ambition as much as basketball strategy, setting the scene for growing tensions. Then, just as the debate seemed ready to cool off, an an explosive discussion erupted on national television. Stephen A. Smith, Music, who had spent much of the season challenging fellow commentators over the treatment of the rookie superstar, Music, delivered a passionate critique that shattered the prevailing narrative. He reinforced what many devoted supporters have been arguing for months, that many influential figures within the sport have become disconnected from the realities unfolding around them. Smith pointed to what he described as remarkable hypocrisy from individuals who spent months minimizing the impact of the league's newest sensation, only to later reorganize their priorities once the financial benefits became impossible to ignore. He specifically argued that several coaches and executives, including those connected to Indiana's new direction, seemed disconnected from the fan base driving the sport's unprecedented growth. During a heated segment, he detailed how league insiders spent months downplaying Clark's influence while physical confrontations, controversial storylines, and constant criticism dominated headlines. Yet as soon as television deals expanded and the league's business outlook skyrocketed, many of those same voices suddenly wanted to position themselves at the center of the movement. Smith argued that the incoming leadership appeared eager to take ownership of a story they did not create, presenting themselves as a solution when, in his view, the phenomenon itself was already carrying the sport forward. He criticized what he saw as the arrogance of stepping into a situation transformed by a generational player and behaving as though the coaching staff Music was a primary attraction. His comments stripped away much of the carefully managed image surrounding the situation, Music, portraying it instead as a frantic race by influential figures to associate themselves with a movement they had previously underestimated. Yet criticism had already begun long before Smith voiced his opinion. The moment reports of the coaching change surfaced online, reactions exploded across social media, exposing a widening divide between organizational leadership and the fans filling arenas. The new generation of supporters, the ones driving record-breaking ratings, purchasing merchandise at historic levels, and packing venues nationwide, remain intensely loyal to the player who sparked their interest in the league. They witnessed every hard foul, every controversial remark, and every debate-filled media cycle throughout the season. They saw how certain veterans and established figures reacted to the rookie's arrival, often treating her as an outsider instead of acknowledging her impact on the sport's growth. So when word spread that a veteran coach closely associated with the league's traditional power structure would take over the fever, many supporters reacted with immediate suspicion. Online discussions quickly filled with claims that the move was more about visibility than basketball. Fans questioned why the organization pursued a familiar establishment figure rather than seeking a modern offensive strategist capable of maximizing the team's exciting style of play. Music. Much of the frustration stems from a belief that decision-makers underestimate the intelligence of their audience. Critics argue that executives assume attaching a recognizable coaching name to the franchise automatically creates credibility with traditional basketball observers, while overlooking the fact that many newer fans remain skeptical of the sport's longtime power brokers. From that perspective, the move represents a significant public relations gamble, highlighting a growing disconnect between those making decisions and the consumers driving the league's success. That divide also feeds into a broader storyline that has followed the sport for months. For many supporters, this entire coaching saga serves as further evidence supporting the tensions and resentment they believe shaped much of the 2024 season. Throughout the year, countless analysts insisted there was no jealousy, no bitterness, and no coordinated resistance toward the league's rising superstar. Yet for a large portion of the fan base, the events unfolding behind the scenes only strengthened their belief that those underlying tensions were far more real than many were willing to admit. The claim was that the physical fouls, the Olympic roster omissions, and the dismissive remarks from retired players were simply part of normal competitive intensity. Yet the sudden, aggressive rush to secure the head coaching position in Indiana completely undermines that narrative. If the rookie campaign truly represented nothing unusual, then a proven and highly regarded coach like White would have had no reason to leave behind a championship-level roster for a franchise that had only narrowly reached the opening round of the playoffs. The truth is that everyone involved in the league understands exactly where influence now sits. What once looked like resentment has now evolved into calculated self-interest. They failed to overpower her on the floor. They failed to mentally destabilize her through physical pressure. And they failed to shift public opinion despite sustained attempts. So the revised approach from the established order has become straightforward. If the phenomenon cannot be defeated, the next option is to attach themselves to it and gain control from within. It becomes an exercise in ego preservation for a system unwilling to release authority. Veteran figures position themselves on the sidelines, music, arms folded, ready to absorb praise when success eventually arrives. The desired narrative is one where their experience, composure, and tactical influence are credited for unlocking a championship run. At its core, it is an obvious effort to redirect attention and reclaim control over a player whose rise in popularity disrupted the traditional hierarchy from the beginning. However, beneath all of this maneuvering, the underlying force driving these decisions becomes increasingly clear. Ultimately, every action in this high-stakes power struggle traces back to financial incentive and expanding institutional control. The league's recently secured multi-billion-dollar broadcast agreement has transformed the entire economic landscape, and there is no confusion about who made that expansion possible. Television exposure, corporate partnerships, sold-out arenas, and record-breaking merchandise demand have created an unprecedented revenue surge for the Indiana franchise. For executives and coaches alike, aligning with this team has become more than professional opportunity. It represents access to long-term wealth, influence, and security at a level rarely seen in the sport. The return of Kelly Krauskopf to Indiana's front office as head of basketball operations, followed by swift and decisive restructuring of the coaching staff, reflects a calculated and uncompromising strategy to consolidate that financial momentum. Leadership recognized that hesitation would risk losing control of the narrative entirely, allowing the athletes to become the dominant force while the organization itself faded into the background. There is a growing fear of a future where players hold the true leverage and institutions are reduced to secondary roles. By installing an experienced, high-profile head coach, the franchise is attempting to reinforce a traditional power structure. Music. The objective is to present the organization to sponsors and media partners as a stable, professionally managed system rather than a player-centered phenomenon driving unpredictable cultural momentum. It is an effort to institutionalize something that originally grew organically, and in doing so, they appear willing to sacrifice ability and loyalty in pursuit of control. Yet this strategy carries significant risk, especially as the psychology of the fan base continues to evolve. Modern supporters are no longer passive observers. They behave like a highly engaged and defensive collective ready to react to any perceived disrespect toward their star. When Stephen A. Smith criticized the establishment for being disconnected, he was echoing the frustration of a massive audience that feels increasingly dismissed. Fans interpret Stephanie White's arrival not as a natural progression, but as an encroachment by the same system they believe once tried to diminish their favorite player's impact. They remember the media discussions that downplayed her influence. They remember the veterans who questioned her legitimacy. So when a high-profile member of that same coaching circle suddenly lands in Indianapolis to assume control, the response from supporters is immediate and filled with doubt. Many fans worry that the incoming staff will attempt to scale back the up-tempo, deep-range shooting identity that made the team so entertaining during the latter stretch of the season. There is a growing concern that a traditional, structure-heavy philosophy will replace creativity with strict control, effectively limiting free expression on the court, like putting a speed limiter on a high-performance engine just to remind everyone who is in charge. This reaction is not random. It stems directly from a year of perceived condescension directed at this newly expanded fan base. And as the off-season continues, the tension only continues to build. Music. The consequences of this divide reach well beyond coaching decisions and begin to influence the entire future direction of the franchise. Even player decisions, such as a situation involving Kelsey Mitchell, the experienced guard who played a vital role in the team's late-season rise, now sit under an extreme spotlight. Management must balance salary restrictions, free agency uncertainty, and roster building while being watched more closely than ever before in the sport history. Fans are demanding a roster tailored specifically around their generational floor leader. Fast-cutting forwards, elite perimeter shooters, and athletes capable of finishing rapid transition plays cleanly under pressure. Their fear is that an established style coach like White, paired with veteran leadership in the front office, will revert to a slower, more physical blueprint that ignores modern pace and space principles. If the organization begins prioritizing aging, half-court-oriented players over dynamic spacing and speed, many will see it as confirmation that critics like Stephen A. Smith were right all along. It would suggest that internal pride is outweighing practical need to maximize a once-in-a-generation talent. The idea of slowing down one of the most explosive offensive systems in the league feels almost counterintuitive, yet reflects the exact concern many supporters now carry. That anxiety grows stronger when viewed through the lens of sports history, where every major disruptive force is initially met with resistance from established institutions. When the three-point revolution first emerged, traditional coaches dismissed it as a passing trend, until it permanently reshaped the game and made older systems obsolete. What is happening in Indiana mirrors that same instinct to contain disruption before it fully takes over. Leadership appears to be attempting to formalize and regulate something that originally grew organically and unpredictably. Stephen A. Smith's commentary resonated so strongly because he understands the entertainment side of sports as much as the competition itself. He recognizes that audiences are not tuning in for rigid execution alone. They are drawn to spectacle, creativity, deep shooting range, and moments of brilliance that defy expectation. When he criticizes a leadership group for being disconnected, he is effectively warning them that over-control could damage the very product driving their resurgence. If they over-engineer the system, suppress individuality, or force outdated expectations onto a generational star, they risk alienating the very audience that revitalized the league's popularity. The idea that a front office could tightly regulate a cultural movement that grew organically feels increasingly unrealistic. And because of that, the upcoming training camp now carries more pressure than any in recent memory. The stakes could not be higher. Indiana has already completed its internal reshaping, replacing a hard-working developmental coach with a more established and polished figure capable of representing the franchise on a larger stage. But in doing so, they have also placed themselves under a microscope unlike anything they have experienced before. Smith's harsh assessment that decision-makers are out of touch is not just media drama. It reflects a broader warning about perception and trust. Fans are paying attention to every detail with growing skepticism. They understand the motivations behind the coaching change and are unlikely to accept surface-level explanations. If the new regime attempts to impose rigid,